up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at noon, another deadly fire in Korea, this time at a nursing home, kills at least 21 people. A dementia patient in his 80s is arrested on suspicion of arson. The state-run Korea Development Institute slightly lowers its 2014 economic growth projection to 3.7%, citing a contraction in consumer spending caused by the Sewol ferry disaster. Plus, President Barack Obama announces plans to pull out all but 9,800 U.S. troops in Afghanistan this year and withdraw the rest by 2016. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Wednesday, May 28th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime. Korea woke up to news of yet another horrible tragedy this morning. At least 21 people have been killed in a fire at a nursing home in southern Korea.
The blaze broke out shortly after midnight at the Jang-seong Hospital in Jeollanam-do province. Our Laah Hyun-kyung has the details.
Most of the victims were in their 70s as the hospital specializes in taking care of senior citizens with chronic health conditions. 7 people are still receiving medical treatment, but the number of dead is likely to rise as 6 are said to be in serious condition. Firefighters say the blaze was brought under control within half an hour, but many died or were affected from inhaling smoke and toxic gases. Police have taken an 81-year-old male dementia patient into custody on charges of arson. Officers say they have surveillance camera footage of the suspect, identified only by his last name Kim, going in and out of the room that was found to be the origin of the fire. The room was being used to store hospital supplies and was said to have no inflammable materials. The hospital is suspected of having only one nurse on the night shift for the ward, taking care of some 80 elderly stroke and dementia patients who would have needed physical assistance to escape. Because the lack of medical staff on duty likely contributed to the high death toll, authorities are looking to see if the hospital broke the law by not having enough staff on standby. Laah Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
Government restructuring and new appointments, all of these come in line with President Park Geun-hye's pledge to push ahead with reforms in the aftermath of the Sewol ferry disaster. But these latest spate of accidents has again laid bare the country's inadequate safety management system and is denting the president's efforts. Our correspondent Chu Sun has more.
The sinking of the Sewol ferry on April 16th and the government's insufficient management of the accident forced many to think about problems and ill practices within the Korean society.
이번 참사로 우리는 고귀한 생명을 너무나 많이 잃었습니다. 그 희생이 헛되지 않도록 대한민국의 개혁과 대변혁을 반드시 만들어가는 것이 남은 우리들의 의무라고 생각합니다.
On Tuesday, President Park emphasized the need to increase efficiency and responsibility within the government by appointing a new deputy prime minister to look after areas outside the economy and security. At a cabinet meeting Tuesday, the president said alongside the current deputy prime minister and finance minister and the head of the National Security Office, the new deputy prime minister should be given the task of overseeing the remaining issues mainly related to education, society, and culture. Officials at the presidential office say the new system reflects the president transferring more responsibilities to the executive branch, with the prime minister in charge of law and order, public sector reforms, and public safety, and his deputies in charge of other areas. The Ministry of Security and Public Administration, which came under fire for its lax response to the recent ferry accident, will have its safety and personnel management roles transferred to new ministries under the prime minister's office. And it's anticipated the president will carry out major reshuffles within the cabinet and the presidential office after the June 4th local elections. However, with news of other safety-related accidents causing dozens of deaths this week, it's doubtful whether the president's reform measures will help assuage public anger at the government. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Now, despite marathon negotiations at the National Assembly over launching a parliamentary probe into last month's Sewol ferry disaster, the rival parties remain at odds over a number of critical issues. The talks began Tuesday with the ruling Sewol party and opposition parties divided on the method and timing of the investigation. The families of the victims attended the negotiations and stayed throughout the night, demanding a swift agreement. They also warned politicians not to use the accident for political purposes. 16 victims remain unaccounted for and no bodies have been found since last week. To speed up efforts, the families of the missing have now agreed to let authorities cut into the fourth floor of the sunken vessel. That operation is expected to begin in the next few hours. Now, there's been a flurry of diplomatic activity in recent months to jumpstart the long-stalled six-party talks on North Korea's denuclearization. Pyongyang, however, is refusing to make concessions on its nuclear program. Hwang Sang-hee sat down with Victor Cha. Mr. Cha is the Korea chair for the Center of Strategic and International Studies. And Sang-hee asked him whether he thought the talks would resume anytime soon.
Bringing back North Korea to the negotiating table could take some time. In an interview with Arirang News on Tuesday, Victor Cha, Korea chair for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, said the United States has shown some flexibility, but that its offer remains unanswered.
But I think what the United States is saying is that, look, if you show you're willing to stop testing and allow inspectors back in, then the U.S. is willing to come back to negotiations. It's a sign of flexibility on the part of the United States to keep the negotiations alive. But the North Koreans don't seem to be interested in that right now.
While some view the so-called six-party talks as an old formula, the visiting expert said the multilateral framework is still a valid way to denuclearize Pyongyang. The six-party talks involving the two Koreas, the United States, China, Japan, and Russia, broke down in December 2008.
The U.S.-North Korea bilateral is important because North Korea wants to talk to the United States. But the six-party format is also important because it ensures that whatever agreements are made between the U.S. and North Korea are reaffirmed in the six-party context to ensure that, in particular, the North Koreans comply with the agreements.
Dr. Cha says China could take a stronger role by linking North Korea's economic aid to its denuclearization, but that it's not ready to take that risk.
If they cut off things too severely, they could collapse the regime. And right now, at least their calculation is that that is not worth the risk, even though it means a slowly developing nuclear program.
And the remaining five parties have problems of their own. For instance, South Korea and Japan are at odds over historical issues. Dr. Cha says the friction will affect the ability to coordinate effectively on North Korea, which is why the two neighbors both need to take action.
I certainly think that Japan should issue an apology for the comfort women. But if the Japanese issue an apology, I think the South Koreans have to be ready to accept an apology.
Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea. Connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about 11.
Korea and the United Arab Emirates will work together in tapping into other nuclear energy markets, mostly Middle Eastern and African countries, including Saudi Arabia. Korea's Trade Minister Yoon Sang-jik said Tuesday the two countries are not far away from signing a memorandum of understanding on the issue. Yoon added the leaders of Seoul and Abu Dhabi reached an agreement in principle during President Park Geun-hye's recent trip to the region, where Korea's technology is being used to build nuclear power plants. Korea will also likely be able to seal the deal on becoming the main operator for the next 6 decades of the nuclear reactors in the UAE currently under construction. The contract will likely be worth some $20 billion. And Korea's state-run economic policy think tank has lowered its economic outlook for this year to 3.7%. And as our Kwon-soo reports, last month's ferry disaster played a key role in this downward revision.
A drop in private consumption is the main culprit that brought down the Korea Development Institute's growth forecast this year. This comes as consumers have been spending less since the Sewol ferry disaster last month. Although the think tank did not see this as a long-term risk, the slow consumption pulled down the country's 2014 economic growth forecast to 3.7%. Number-wise, it's the same figure from its last projection. But given its recent adjustment in its GDP calculation, this reflects a drop of 0.2 percentage points. Not only dull consumption, but also growth forecasts in facility investment and spending in the construction were revised down. And against this backdrop, the KDI added that the country needs to allow a slight fiscal deficit for now, given the consumption slowdown, and called on the Bank of Korea to hold the key rate, saying it may be too premature to tighten the money flow. And it looks like worries over the ferry disaster's impact on domestic spending are resonating in the central bank as well. The May minutes from the Bank of Korea show some committee members did raise views that the ferry disaster may crimp spending and investment in the country. Kwon-soo, Arirang News.
Drive around any major city in Korea these days, and you'll notice a lot more Audis, BMWs, and Volkswagens than you would have even a few years ago. This is because more and more Korean consumers are buying imported cars. The Korea Automobile Manufacturers Association said Wednesday that over 75,000 cars worth over $2.5 billion were imported into Korea in the first 4 months of the year. In terms of volume, this is up 54% from the same period last year. The number of imported cars registered last month also set a record at 16,000. Analysts forecast imported cars to make up 15% of the Korean market this year, up from 12.7% in 2013.
The newest flagship smartphone by Korean tech giant LG Electronics hits the shelves in 100 countries this Friday, including here in Korea. The next generation G3 has a larger screen than its predecessor at 5.5 inches and a Quad HD display with 2 times better resolution. LG Electronics hopes the G3 helps the company take a bite out of Apple and Samsung's vice-like grip on the global smartphone market. In the first quarter of the year, LG had a 4.2% share of the market with sales of $3.2 billion. Now, the so-called creative economy has been touted as the next growth model that is going to transform Korea over the coming years and decades. With this in mind, our Park Ji-won reports on the government's plans to nurture the next generation of creative thinkers.
26-year-old Lee Jun-min and his classmates have developed a program for a simple manual game.
We wanted to create a game that requires interactive body movements like when we played with shadows as children.
And university student Shin Jae-won has been involved in a storytelling business project.
We realize the storytelling industry's immense possible influence on the creative economy, as it can provide an endless amount of new items.
They are some of Korea's young pioneers with creative minds, the fuel that runs the country's creative economy. According to a definition by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, at the heart of any creative economy is the contents industry, which spans diverse sectors like film, music, and gaming. But these sectors are not new to Korea, which has the world's 7th biggest media entertainment industry, raking in some $45 billion in 2012. The nation's contents industry in total logged an annual revenue of nearly $90 billion last year, up more than 4% on year. Zeroing in on its great potential for growth, the government aims to increase its annual revenue further to nearly $120 billion by 2017. As one of many efforts to stimulate the nation's creativity, the first Content Korea Lab, a free public center equipped with diverse facilities like recording studios and video editing rooms, opened in Seoul.
Content Korea Lab is where anyone with creative ideas can gather and fuse their minds with others to initiate new projects.
The Culture Ministry plans to open 10 more centers nationwide by 2017 to act as hubs for inspiring and cultivating even greater creativity for the future. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Korean researchers have developed a device that can supply electricity to trains wirelessly. This is particularly exciting as they say the new system is not only safer, but will allow trains to go even faster. Kim Min-ji reports.
This KTX bullet train is able to move as electricity is supplied through high-tension wires installed above the tracks. What you see now is a next-generation high-speed train called Haemu. Unlike the KTX, it doesn't have a device that supplies electricity. Instead, it receives electricity wirelessly through a device that is installed between the tracks. Let's see how it works. The wireless device receives 1 megawatt of electricity from a nearby inverter, which forms a high-frequency magnetic field of 60 kilohertz. A power collector installed underneath the train absorbs this magnetic field and converts it back into electricity, making the train move. Although the technology is already used worldwide, Korea has become the first country to succeed in transferring this amount of electricity. And as it does not require the installation of high-tension wires, it is safer and cuts down on maintenance costs. Researchers say that when the technology is applied to high-speed trains, they will be able to travel faster than now.
When the upper system of the train is removed, there is no speed resistance. This means that the train can raise its speed significantly. As there is no resistance, it also reduces energy consumption.
The Korea Railroad Research Institute plans to commercialize the technology starting next year. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following at this hour. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim, who's standing by at the news center.
Eunice, U.S. President Barack Obama has announced plans to wind down what has become the longest war in American history.
That's right, Junju, 12 years and counting. He said all combat troops will be pulled out of Afghanistan by the end of year 2016. Here's Hwang Ji-hye with the story.
When U.S. President Barack Obama leaves office in early 2017, the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan will be near zero. The president said Tuesday that less than 10,000 American troops will remain in Afghanistan after this year, and roughly half that number will be in the country by the end of 2015. A year later, the United States will pull out its last remaining combat troops.
1 year later, by the end of 2016, our military will draw down to a normal embassy presence in Kabul with a security assistance component, just as we've done in Iraq.
It will put an end to more than 12 years of war launched shortly after the September 11th attacks. More than 2,000 U.S. troops have died in the conflict, plus countless more on the Afghan side. There are currently around 32,000 American troops in Afghanistan. Obama said that so much of America's foreign policy was focused on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that the future of Afghanistan must be decided by Afghans.
Yet this is how wars end in the 21st century. Not through signing ceremonies, but through decisive blows against our adversaries, transitions to elected governments.
The withdrawal plan has not come without criticism in the U.S. as Republicans say the timeline is too tight. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
In Ukraine, dozens of pro-Russian rebels were killed in the fiercest battle yet between separatists and Kiev's forces that began as President-elect Petro Poroshenko was giving his victory speech early Monday local time. A representative from the so-called Donetsk People's Republic told Reuters more than 50 rebels were dead in the fight near Ukraine's second-largest airport in Donetsk. Bodies were still being recovered as corpses were stacked in a morgue, several missing limbs. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called on Kiev to stop the bloodshed, adding that Moscow was ready for direct talks with Ukraine's new president. And low voter turnout has led to Egypt's extending its presidential election by a day in a poll that is widely expected to elect frontrunner Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Now, observers estimate that turnout on Monday was less than 15% and even lower on Tuesday, which was declared a national holiday for the vote. Election officials said Tuesday non-voters will be fined over 500 Egyptian pounds, or about $70. A good turnout is viewed as critical in legitimizing al-Sisi's rise to power. Last year, the former military chief ousted Egypt's first elected president since the 2011 revolution, Mohamed Morsi. Thailand's military junta has detained former education minister Jagturong, who emerged from hiding Tuesday to criticize the country's current military rule. In a surprise news conference at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand, he said a coup d'etat was not a solution to the problems of Thai society and called for elections, warning of a potential disaster should resistance to the coup grow. He was apprehended shortly after that. Chae-sung was the first member of the ousted government to make a public appearance. The junta has summoned and detained more than 200 people, including politicians, academics, and journalists, since assuming power last Thursday. And finally, the Malaysian government has released the raw transmission satellite data used to determine the flight path of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 that remains missing after disappearing nearly 3 months ago. The Inmarsat data gave further evidence that the plane crashed into the Indian Ocean after detouring south and running out of fuel. Officials say the search could take up to a year, with questions now being raised about how to proceed and how to split the growing search costs.
Good afternoon. Well, most of the regions are having a hazy day today as the lingering yellow dust from yesterday continues to affect the nation. So be sure to have a face mask with you at all times. So a mix of sun, clouds, and polluted condition is in the cards today, along with high temperatures topping out in the mid to upper 20s across the country. Although the slightly cooler day is in store for down south, since some of the inland regions there are expecting sporadic showers in the afternoon, but the precipitation should be less than 5 millimeters. Now, over in Jindo, wind should be blowing at 8 to 13 meters per second, and waves should be 2.5 meters high at their highs, and the currents in the water should get faster today. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The afternoon high in the capital, Daegu, Gwangju, and Daegu and the capital and Gwangju will all rise to 29, while Busan climbed to 25 later in the afternoon. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like down on Jeju and Daejeon should see a high of 28. Dokdo will reach 24, while Mount Keungang tops out at 19. Well, that's all for me today, but I'll be back with more updates tomorrow morning. And it's time to take a look at the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I will be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for watching.